Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. He joins me now to talk about Saskatchewan politics and equalization. Thank you so much for joining me, Premier.
Hey, Danielle.
I have a question for you. I know I'm going to get lots of this, so I may as well get it out of the way right at the beginning. Please ask Mr. Wall if he will become our Premier. So is this the secret agenda of having sent us all your entrepreneurs in the past, is that you're going to create the new province of Saskatchewan?
No, we want to disappoint people in Alberta by bringing everyone back to Saskatchewan, actually. That's been part of the plan.
That's what I'm worried about. Hey, let's talk about equalization. I'm glad to see that you've weighed in on that issue because I think it's very important for those provinces that are net contributors to Confederation to start setting the stage for when our next negotiations are going to be. What's your view now that Saskatchewan is a half province?
Well, we've been a half province now for a number of years, and so I need to offer the following proviso, or maybe a bit of a disclaimer, to say that we are grateful to have had the benefits of the program while we were a have-not province, and we want the rest of the country to know and understand that. We're grateful for it. We can have an argument and a debate about whether we should have ever needed it given our resources, but for good or for ill, we did benefit. We were recipients, and we also don't begrudge the fact that other provinces need it. I should also point out, Danielle, there is no prospect, neither is there an inclination or a desire that we would ever return to that status. Our economy is diversified, and while we're feeling the pinch of low oil prices, we're still in a growth position, and there's just no prospects for us ever going back to being a recipient or a have-not province. And so for that reason, I do think it's important for us in Saskatchewan and others who are in the half-province category, and frankly for all Canadians, to be willing to discuss this program. It's a $17 billion federal program that has some very dated and ineffective elements to it, including the fact that there is a lag period in terms of the program catching up to marketplace realities. So while Alberta and Saskatchewan are dealing with $46 oil, and all of that means for our budgets, we're 3 to 5 years away from that sort of being represented in the formula. And in the meantime, if you take a per capita look at things, our Saskatchewan taxpayers put in about $500 million every year into equalization, and Alberta puts $2 billion. Alberta taxpayers pay $2 billion into the program every single year. So if there's this lag, and if there's this notion that hydro is excluded from the formula, and it is, by the way, which to the great benefit of other provinces that have a lot of hydro, Quebec and Manitoba and a few others.
Yep.
There's two examples of why this program should be a part of an election debate. It needs to be updated. And then maybe a little bit later on we can get into a bit of a bolder discussion on whether or not, even with those changes, we should be looking at something different, a different focus completely than what we have with equalization currently.
Well, let me talk about some of the problems with this program. I'm interested that Saskatchewan did not seem to need some kind of transition program to get you from there to here when it was have not to have, the same way that Newfoundland and Nova Scotia did. Because one of the weird parts of the program is that as you start developing your economy, your equalization gets clawed back dollar for dollar. So Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia said, well, let's keep our equalization and phase it down as we're building up our resources. And I wonder, what is the path forward for some of these other provinces that have been chronic users of the program? Like, I can't even foresee how Quebec gets off the program and stands on its own 2 feet financially. What is the path forward for provinces like that?
It's a great question, and there's no structure for that kind of transition. There's nothing sort of systemic or fundamental to the formula that would allow for that. It's something that's sort of negotiated. And I understand the sentiment. I remember watching, before I was involved in politics, watching the debate in the province and hearing an NDP finance minister here say, basically, we need to be very careful about what we wish for because we don't necessarily, speaking for the government, we don't want to be a have province because they'll lose out on those equalization dollars. By the way, I think that was one of the first manifestations of what would be a disconnect between our NDP and voters who very much wanted to be a have province. We're happy to be contributing, and I think that's still the case. They're happy to be on this side of the equation, notwithstanding the $500 million our taxpayers put in. I know that's the case for Albertans as well. However, I think if we can make some improvements in the name of fairness, that's a reasonable thing to propose. I would offer this other idea that I've offered on a similar talk show in our province today. what if we were to say, look, equalization, we'll maintain it. It's constitutional. We can't, it's not something you can get rid of. Certainly not easily. What if we cut it in half? We'd have $9 billion in equalization available for provinces still, but then we'd have roughly that same amount available for, how about a national infrastructure program? How about a split between infrastructure and sustained permanent tax relief to keep our economy strong? Yeah. There would be a benefit to the entire country and a benefit to those who are generating the wealth and creating the opportunity and the tax base that provide for all the transfers, not just equalization, but health transfers and, of course, all the programs that we prize as Canadians. I think it's time for a debate about equalization, and I know there won't be a lot of, there's not going to be a lot of folks interested in that perhaps, but we should be talking about it. I think Saskatchewan and Alberta should be saying, look, there's some attendant unfairness that we can deal with promptly in terms of hydro, for example, and the lag. Yep. 3 to 5 year lag, but there's also a long-term discussion we should have as well.
Just to put some numbers around that, I have been talking about equalization for the last couple of weeks, and when Danny Williams came through town when he was premier, he pointed out that Quebec subsidized electricity. If they paid full market rates, it would generate about $8 billion more for them in revenue, which is roughly what they're getting from the equalization program. So I take your point on that. I do have a caller or a listener who wanted me to pass on his regards. Please tell Mr. Wall, thank you for defending Alberta and Saskatchewan interests. I wish Alberta had a premier who would stand up for Alberta and ever so important pipeline development, i.e. Energy East, Northern Gateway, Keystone, etc. So thank you for that. You probably don't hear it enough, but I hear it an awful lot, people talking about you here in Alberta. Let me ask you about the First Minister's meeting recently to get a sense of the tone of those discussions. Because what I worry is that instead of your proposal of having equalization, that we've got a bunch of Eastern premiers that are looking at ways to create a new equalization program under the guise of a carbon tax or cap and trade or some kind of trade-off as a quid pro quo for allowing us market access. What is your sense of those discussions and whether or not that's reason for us to worry out here?
Well, I haven't heard that lately. I know that's a concern. I think it's a concern in Saskatchewan as well. We do have, equalization effectively, with all of its flaws, should preclude any discussion of something else that is basically redistributing wealth in the country in the name of energy and the environment. I didn't hear that a lot. What I was concerned about, Danielle, and remain concerned, although we got to the point where there was a Canadian energy strategy that we could, sort of notionally agree to, is there just seems to be a real hesitancy to even say the words oil and gas. I think I said down there, as far as I could tell, neither oil nor gas were four-letter words, but you wouldn't have known it because it's. I think if you take a look at the Canadian energy strategy, something related to carbon, post-carbon economy or climate change is, I think somebody counted it about 37 times in the document, and oil and gas named specifically are 7 times. This in an energy strategy in a country that is home to to the world's third largest oil reserves on the planet. And by the way, the other two that are above us haven't nearly the environmental record. They obviously don't have the human rights record. And so it's frustrating that more and more, I should say, maybe it's not Canadians. It's perhaps groups out there or those who are in positions of representation seem to be somewhat embarrassed or ashamed that we have oil sands, which are a good thing and have provided so much to all of Canada's economy, and that we also have a lot of conventional oil, as we do in Saskatchewan, that we have natural gas, that we have uranium, by the way, which comes with its own attendant political debate, but we have it in at a world-class scale. So it's frustrating that even at that meeting there seemed to be almost that we were a little bit embarrassed that we have this. Every other country in the world would give a lot to have what we have, and we don't want to get it to market. We don't want to maximize our value in terms of getting it to Tidewater, as you pointed out. We don't even want to mention it in what's supposed to be an energy strategy for the country.
Well, can you talk about what Saskatchewan is doing on reducing carbon dioxide? Because I think you've had some success in a couple of projects. I don't know if they're pilots or if they're actually full scale.
No, they're full scale now, and you bet I will. Last October, we went live on the world's only coal demonstration project, although it's a 100-megawatt coal plant that was running, so it's not like a pilot. It was already operating. We retrofitted it with a carbon capture technology. We pre-sold all the 1 million tons of CO2 to oil companies because, as you will know well, in Alberta, CO2 happens. Whatever you think it does to the plants and long-term to climate, it also has it's maybe the most effective flood for enhanced oil recovery. So
Yep.
we've pre-sold the CO2, and I can tell you that this coal now in southeast Saskatchewan at Boundary Dam 3 near Estevan is burning 4 times cleaner than natural gas. The project came on time and on budget, and there was a Premier's climate change meeting in Quebec not long ago, hosted by Premier Couillard, and I'm not sure my comments were all that welcome there either, but I think we need to make the point as Canadians that, look, we're responsible for something under 3% of worldwide global emissions. Meanwhile, and so we can do all these things, I guess, carbon taxes and cap and trade and levies, and everyone's doing their own thing, and we're investing this huge per capita investment in clean coal technology. But, if they're going to build, and they are, one coal plant, 600 megawatt coal plant every 13 days in China, and if India has 500 coal plants on the books, and they do, and Japan is expanding their coal fleet now that they've been reducing or shutting down the nuclear piece, if Germany is building coal, if the United States continues to burn coal, then, what if we actually, as Canadians, said we can actually affect worldwide climate change by focusing on technology that we can actually make available to the rest of the world? And instead, we are going to, go through what's, I think, largely a very political effort of each province doing its own thing in the name of climate change. And sure, we need to do our part in Canada. I'm not saying that we ought not to, but boy, we should maybe be more focused on the technology that'll help in parts of the world where frankly, they're not interested in cap and trade, and they're not about to introduce a carbon tax. And
technology that we know works. Now, Rex Murphy wrote a very complimentary article, a column about your position recently in the National Post. He points out that others see it as kind of impolite to point out to our premiers in other provinces that there's this connection between us developing these energy resources and the equalization dollars that they receive. What kind of reaction do you get when you have to point that out to premiers who are on the recipient end of a lot of the success that we're having in Western Canada with developing our energy?
I think there's a large understanding, especially in Atlantic Canada, Danielle. The premiers there, those in leadership, they know. I mean, they have neighbors and friends and sons, in the case of former Premier Allward, who worked in Alberta. I know he would go back and forth like so many did. So I think there's a real understanding there, and that's helpful because they speak out. Premier McNeil was helpful throughout this whole thing from Nova Scotia. But I do think just generally we can't take it for granted in Western Canada that people make the link, and boy, they should. I mean, the impact of the oil sands on our country, the amount of direct jobs and indirect jobs, the businesses they've created right across Canada, including in Ontario, the social programs they've helped to fund.
Yep.
The education and health and the things that we prize as Canadians have been strengthened recently because of a broadened tax base right across Canada, largely due to the energy sector. There's other sectors as well, but largely due to the energy sector growth in the last while. So we just have to be very vigilant. We have to make that case. Let's never be complacent that people just assume that, boy, all of these jobs that have been created and investment that's been attracted is a good thing. Because the other NGOs and groups are out there that will never, they'll never finish the sentence. And so we better be prepared to do that.
Do we have a partner in Quebec, Premier Philippe Couillard? And during the last election, he talked about wanting to wean Quebec off equalization payments. I got the sense that he was campaigning on a platform of development of resources so that they could bring more wealth and jobs to their economy. What was your sense of him having met with him? Is this somebody that we can deal with, whether it's on those issues or whether it's on getting what we need to make sure Energy East is a reality?
I've met with him a couple of times and been in meetings with him, and I'm impressed. I do believe, he is working hard to do what he needs to do in terms of the Quebec budget, Quebec expenditures. He's also, I think, wanting to find ways to be constructive nationally in terms of energy transportation, whether it's hydro or whether it's the pipeline. And so, I certainly have a lot of time for Premier Couillard. He also has, there'd be a large group in Quebec who, wouldn't be excited about Energy East pipeline, even if all the facts were out there. And by the way, on that particular pipeline, I think we need to continue to get the facts out there.
Yeah.
I think the more Canadians, including in Quebec, that know that we currently import oil from the Middle East and Venezuela and who knows where, notwithstanding the huge oil resources that we have, I think the more that Canadians understand that this pipeline will help end that dependence on foreign oil for our country, will get greater support. I think more Canadians know that the more they know this pipeline will create value-added opportunities in Central and Atlantic Canada, they're going to have greater support. And the more that they understand that this is a conversion. For some reason, a lot of people out there think this is a brand new pipeline all the way along, and we know that 2/3 of it already exists. But we need to get that message out. By the way, and so to answer your question, I'm very hopeful about Premier Couillard's approach to these issues.
Are you speaking with him en français? I think we're all wondering how your French lessons are coming along.
No, I struggle with the one with the one official language that I know.
Let me just give you an opportunity. Last time I saw you speak here in Alberta, you were here because of the Saskatchewan being in the Grey Cup. It was that terrible game where there were too many men on the field, but you gave a wonderful presentation to the entrepreneurs in this province who are investing in yours. I don't know if you have anything that you want to say to them now, especially since we're dealing with a lot of market turmoil and a lot of turmoil over the potential for a royalty review here.
Well, just for your listeners, know that in Saskatchewan we're cheering for Alberta, not in football, but we're cheering for football for Alberta economically, because what's good for your province has been historically good for Saskatchewan. When Alberta is strong, Canada is strong, and Saskatchewan's strong. So we are hoping to continue to work together with Alberta through the New West Partnership. We have not heard whether the government there is going to continue with it, but that's a good example of the West working together on important issues. But sure, we'll always work to attract investment and people, not just from Alberta, but from across the country, just as Alberta has been pretty successful doing in terms of our province. And so we would offer competitive and stable royalty structures. We offer some pretty specific lower tax incentives around new corporate jobs and export-related jobs. We offer a stable regulatory environment that's not subject to change, and I think is considered quite effective. We offer competitive a labor legislative environment. We've made some changes over the last number of years, and we think there's a good balance there now, and we think it also helps our competitiveness. So we offer that. We've undertaken the largest income tax cuts in the history of the province from a general perspective. We have dropped 114,000 low-income people off taxes. We've worked hard to keep the budget balanced, Danielle. We paid off about 44% of the operating debt. That's sort of the cornerstone of our growth agenda. So our message to Albertans and to people in our province and across the country is we're doing what we can. We're working hard to make sure we're offering the best possible environment for people to come and invest and also to have a great quality of life should they come and move to our province and join Rider Nation.
Well, I have to tell you, I see almost more Saskatchewan Rough Rider jerseys around game time than I do of either of our two teams. So you've managed to infiltrate that way as well. So thanks so much for your time today. I know you have to go. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. All the best, Daniel.
You bet.